So ideas pop into my head in the strangest places. The other day I was driving to my sawmill, guys, and I had this idea for a corrugated 5-sided birdhouse flower vase. Well, I needed to get home and get it built because, quite frankly, it was making it hard to see where I was driving. So I wanted to do this corrugation pattern, and I thought about how I could make that, and it ended up being actually fairly simple. I built a tilting router base and used a Roman ogee bit to create this pattern. Now I'm going to be doing a video on the tilting router base and some really cool patterns you can do with that in an upcoming video, so be sure and subscribe. So each of the 5 sides of my birdhouse are going to consist of 3 pieces of material. There's going to be the corrugated maple, which I'm cutting into strips here, and then I'm going to glue 2 pieces of walnut on either side of it to offset the lighter color. Now I want the walnut to stand proud, or just slightly proud, of the corrugation, so I cut those a little bit thicker. One of the tricks for a glue up like this is trying not to get glue squeeze out above the corrugation, where it'd be very difficult to clean. So I taped up each of the back of the pieces of walnut with some painter's tape, and this will kind of help hold everything in place once I have the glue on, not move around. And then I just put a bead of glue along the base of the corrugated maple and very gently clamp things together, and if I started to see squeeze out, I stopped. I did have a little bit that I had to clean up with a sharp chisel. With the glue ups dry, I want to rip these down to their final width. And I want to be very careful that each piece of walnut on either side of the maple is the exact same size, or rather the same width. Now with that done, what I want to do is create an angle on the back of each of those panels to turn this into a 5-sided box. And to do that, I'm using my miter set. Now, I've done a video on the miter set before for those of you who don't know, and I'll put a link in the description box below so you can check that out. I used the miter set to create a piece of wood that was cut at the right angle, and I'm using that as a gauge to set my saw blade to. Now the miter set makes setting angles for segments extremely accurate and very easy, so I use it all the time. Now once I had my angle set, I came back and cut the panels with the angle on either side, being very careful to line the edge of the saw blade up with the edge of the walnut. Once all the angles were cut, all I had to do was come back and trim them up so the corrugations were all kind of lined up in the same pattern. So what I did is I used the belly of the corrugation as my focus point, so I cut each piece so it's centered in the belly of the corrugation. So I want them to line up when I glue this whole thing up. Now after that was done, I used a spacer and just cut all these to a particular length that I wanted. Now I did have to come back on the bottom of each one and trim it out so it would be lined up in the center of the corrugation. The glue up on this was pretty straightforward. I simply just used a straight board and took each of the panels that I had cut and laid them face down on some painter's tape, and then added glue to each of the joints and was able to just wrap this up. Now because I used the miter set to set the angles on this, I knew I wasn't going to have any problems. Every time I've used it, the miters have always come out flawless. With the glue dry on the box, I cut the angles for the roof on my chop saw. Now, I'm not showing that here because I had a little camera trouble. Apparently the operator forgot to press the record button. So I drilled a hole in one of the peaks for the bird hole, and then I also grabbed a stick out of the backyard and I'm using that for the bird's foothold. Now I want this to kind of have a bit of a rustic flair, so I took a piece of walnut that had a live edge and cut that down and then cleaned it up and split it on my table saw to get close to the final dimension that I wanted, or thickness that I wanted. Now once I'd used the table saw to split it down, I cleaned it up on the planer again and then was able to go from there to cutting it to the size pieces that I needed. So after fitting the parts for the roof, I glued those up. And then at this point I decided I really didn't care for how tall the birdhouse was, so I ended up chopping that down a little bit on the chop saw. Now after I decided I liked the height of it, I needed to drill a hole in the roof for the flower stems to go through, and I did that with a Forstner bit, and then glued the base to the birdhouse itself and did a little bit of sanding and sprayed everything with a couple coats of spray lacquer. Now, because I can't just dump water in this, I found a jar that would fit inside of it, added some water, and it was really cool that the jar was just tall enough to stick a little bit up into the roof of the birdhouse, which worked out very nicely. And here's a couple of overexposed shots of the birdhouse. My wife really loves it, and that's really what mattered. I built this for her, and I'm super excited that it had it done, and I really like the way the corrugated patterns came out. So make sure you're subscribed. I'll show you how I did that and some other nifty tricks coming down the pipe.